Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be reviewing the CSIRO or CSIRO Roadmap for Edible Insects. And it's a pretty big document, so I thought I might just do a quick little review on all the really key highlights or the actual key topics that they kind of touch on that I think have huge amount of importance. And in particular, not everyone is going to read this document, so I thought I might make a video on it, and then you can choose to go and do further research in some of the areas that I touch on that I think are going to be pretty important for the edible insect space moving forward. But it's also a bit of an appreciation video for CSIRO to actually put this roadmap together, because it is a super clear document about how edible insects are going to roll out in Australia and some of the more advantage points that we have as well being in Australia. But for everyone who lives overseas as well, who watches the channel, it's just a really great document to have a look at to get some more information on edible insects. So let's get into the video. The first part that I find really interesting in this document is the limitations of the global food production system. So if you're getting into insects, or you're getting into more sustainable farming practices, or whatever you're trying to look at, what has ever drawn you to this video, to this document, I think this is really key to actually find some just really solid facts or information about what's actually currently happening in the world. So it talks about the global population being at 9.7 billion by the year 2050, and how do we actually keep farming and keep growing enough food for all the people across the world. And you know, what's the actual culture and the economic impact, as well as the environmental impact on the environment. It asks a lot of questions about like, what are we doing with our food, our water, or even our waste products, and then how does that actually impact our climate change as well. So getting in more of a sustainable environment is super crucial, and insects can play a massive role impacting that. It also touches on like the COVID-19 effects. So a lot of people, because of COVID-19, they've been locked up in their houses and their diet has been impacted by this. It's about how do we actually get the best bang for our buck when it comes to food. And if we're not exercising as much and we're not actually getting outside, or if we have less hours in the day, then how do we actually consume a high quality diet without actually impacting our life, so, or even like the cost of living as well. So there's some really key parts within these first 3 pages of the document that I think are cool, and I think everyone should be really having a good look at the first couple pages just to get a real wider view and graphs on what edible insects can actually be. Touches a lot also, if we look at the edible insects as a promising industry, you can see the page just over here now. And in here, it talks about like what the value of the edible insect space could be, and then also like what kind of insects that we have and what regions eat different insects across the world. So that I find really interesting. Definitely something worth checking out. The next part that we can see is insects or edible insect products available globally. So you can see it up here. I think this is a really great starting point for anyone who's looking to try insects. So you've got all your different types of food, your protein bars, your breads, your burger patties, crackers, chips, falafel, flowers, just endless amount of things there. But then the beverages like beer, milk, milkshakes, and this isn't just crickets, this is like all the different types of insects that we have. So if you're looking for ideas, or maybe something that you'd be like, well, how do I actually turn my current insects or my crickets that I've got at the moment, how do I actually make a product? Here's just some stepping stones or some starting points that you can actually start to get the brain thinking about, like, oh, maybe I can make a protein bar, or maybe I can make an oil or a pesto, or maybe I want to start making like a milkshake or a protein shake. It's honestly endless. So if you're looking for ideas about what you can turn your crickets or your insects into, definitely check out that page there. The next part that we have is, I think, a really good tool for information. So it kind of breaks down into like what are the edible portions of crickets and mealworms, so the 2 insects up there, you can see them just here, versus chicken, pork and beef. Now obviously edible portions, I think it's pretty funny, they said 80% for crickets. Now you can eat the whole crickets itself, but I'm guessing that from this report they took roasted crickets, and then during the actual cooking process of crickets you do lose, you know, like a leg or a limb, something pretty small, and that's why it's probably only about 80%, but you can get 100% of the cricket when you do eat it. And then it kind of measures the land, the greenhouse gases, the water, the feed, which are all incredible stats and numbers that you can use for promoting your product or actually promoting edible insects as a whole. So that's definitely a really, really cool slide that you can use to educate people on a lot of things. So yeah, definitely check that out. This next part of the document is really, really exciting if you live in Australia, but it's also really exciting if you just live in other parts of the world. You can get a few ideas from where the Australian Edible Insect Association is actually kind of heading. And it brings up kind of the classic stats that we always read about. It's like 2 billion people in 130 countries already eat insects, and close to 400 relatable businesses in the Western world are now operating with edible insects. So the world is growing, and there's a bunch of other stats in here as well that about like conversion rates and how like official it is about actually using insects for human consumption. So definitely check it out. But the really, really cool part is the edible insects in Australia and the impact of that. So there's a big push now for us to actually get back to more of our roots here in Australia and start eating and farming more of the traditional way of eating of our First Nation people. So the stat is like 62,000 insect species are native in Australia, and 60 of the species are actually eaten by First Nation people. So there's a whole new world of edible insects out there that we can explore. So if you are in Australia and you are watching this video, definitely have a look around and just think about what other insects that you see in everyday life, and can it be farmable, can it be used, and give it a shot, because I think it'd be really, really cool to see some of them more. And obviously do your research too, because you can't just dive in and just start farming any old insects. You have to make sure that it's not a pest species as well. It has to be native Australian. There's probably a bunch of other stuff that you really need to start looking into too. But just a general consensus, this could be a really, really big push. And I think it's pretty important to involve First Nation people in this space too. So it'd be really cool to see a bit more of a community being built around farming native species and traditional foods, rather than kind of going down this Western pathway that isn't great for the environment, and we're starting to see a lot of faults or a lot of issues with it. So this whole section is just incredible. Definitely check it out. First Nation people, insects in Australia, and the vision that we have, or the vision that CSIRO have for edible insects, is just incredible. The next part of the document is more so the vision that is being pushed by CSIRO. And I think that in this part, if you are starting out or you're looking for a starting point, definitely have a look through this whole part of the document. It really kind of ties everything nicely together with First Nation people, research, industry and governments, and how we can all work together and collaborate and build relationships between each other to actually make sure that the edible insect space in Australia is sustainable and can actually move forward in a positive direction. So it touches on a lot of the strengths and weaknesses, and also the risks as well. So you can see up on this slide just here, some of the strengths. We've already mentioned the First Nation people and the biodiversity of insects in Australia. We have world-class research facilities, so I think it's going to be huge over the next 10 years, the amount of research that's actually going to be put into edible insects, and it needs to be, because it is such a new industry. Now, of course, the weaknesses are how well do we actually kind of adapt to eating edible insects, but then also the limitations of funding. So is there going to be money for it? It will be an issue. So yeah, this is my call to the Australian government to keep pushing to have more research in this space, so we can have a bit more of an impact on the edible insect space in a global sense as well, because here in Australia we do farm and we have such a good farming culture, but we're definitely a little bit behind the 8 ball when it comes to edible insects. And then of course there's always risks, so lack of funding or the potential reactions or sensitivities, or can we even use insects, how bioavailability is it in our body, can we use insect protein? That's going to be huge. So if you're looking for more ideas about what angle you can go at, go and have a look at the vision as well that we've got here in Australia. And if you are currently farming insects in Australia, definitely check that out. The next part of the document is probably one of my favorites, and it's because this is the pathway that I want to push heavily with Schubugs, and it's actually getting human consumption for edible insects and for crickets. So it's called Towards a Healthier Diet, and it really just touches on all the little issues that we've kind of been exposed to with COVID about having a poorer quality diet, and how does it actually then impact our everyday health when we are exposed to, say, something like COVID. That's obviously an extreme issue, but it does really touch on a lot of important things like preventing diseases like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and the role that edible insects could play in preventing those diseases. There's a huge push for new medicines being made with insects, and that's things like anti-inflammatories, or maybe something like an antibiotic, or there's a huge world that could be pushed and discovered with edible insects. So I think that could be a really cool space. The other thing is like supplements and vitamins. So further down in the document, it's up on the slide right now, there's going to be a bit of a push for, you know, like what research can be done in this space around how usable is the protein, B12, iron supplements, calcium supplements, and then also how does the impact on, for example, if we feed insects a particular type of food, then how can they convert that into maybe a usable vitamin or source for our own diet? So, you know, this whole part about actually turning, you know, our insects into food for human consumption is going to be really interesting, and there's just so many factors that we need to consider. So there's going to be heaps of research moving into this space, but then also if you're just generally interested in eating a healthier diet and having a positive impact on the planet, then this is definitely a document that you want to read up on. And yeah, like there's a part here about edible insects can replace highly processed food, low nutrient food, and high calorie discretionary food. So, you know, adding literally crickets into your banana bread and making a healthy banana bread is going to be a big thing moving forward. So it's really cool to see. So definitely check out this part of the document. It's really incredible. The next part of the document is supporting industry and decision making. So how do we actually use the insects that we have in Australia for our optimal performance or best kind of outcome? And it really does touch on a lot of things like animal feed. So how do we convert insects into animal feed or putting it back into the circular economy? And that goes with like, how do we upscale our food waste system? So where does our food go after we chuck in the bin, and then actually putting it back into an insect farm, and then putting it back into a livestock feed. But then also nutritional supplements, fertilizer, and you can actually see it up here on the slide right now. There's going to be a big push for all these avenues that you can see down the bottom here. Organic insect farms, that's going to be really interesting. Alternative pet food, reducing of plastic waste. I know there's a couple of little insects out there that can actually break down styrofoam. But then yeah, like fertilizer, like everything has a waste product, and insects have a waste product. Then how do we actually convert our fertilizer back into the garden? So I know with our Schubugs, like our farm, we're looking at using the cricket poo or cricket feces and actually using that as fertilizer in your everyday garden. But then also all the egg cartons that they lay on, there's all these little tiny bits of poo on there as well, or fertilizer. How do we then blend up our cardboard and then actually put that back into a bit of a mulch that we can put in our gardens? So that will be a really cool space. There's also a slide here that you can see now. It's kind of the companies that are really pushing big into the edible insect space for human consumption. So we've got like Circular Harvest, so Sky's doing a great job there. We've got Paula from Grubs Upper in WA making some groundwork. I would encourage anyone, if you do want to get into the edible insect space, definitely reach out to these companies. Here's another slide. We've got dog food, so the Buggy Bits. These guys are really cool. I'm a big fan of what they do. They're in New South Wales. And then this is something that I only just saw the other day after reading through this document, is nutrition consulting. So this is something that I find really interesting. It's about educating people on how to use edible insects in their current diet, and if they are missing any like really important nutrients, that they can actually get them through eating edible insects. So yeah, just some great Australian companies that are having a big impact on the edible insect space. It's amazing. And then finally, like enabling growth. So this is a whole slide you can see up here. It really outlays all the different pathways and the connections that need to happen for optimizing growth of edible insects in Australia, the relationships, the resources, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact. I think if you want to get into the edible insect space, this is something that you need to have a look at. Finally, we have the conclusion, and this last statement by CSIRO I couldn't agree more on, and it's Australia is presented with a unique opportunity to leverage its proven track record in innovation and agricultural success to strengthen collaborations among First Nation people, research, industry, and the governments to become a global player in the edible insect market. So this is huge. I think it's a bit of a call to all Australians and all farmers and everyone out there who's generally interested in having an impact on saving the planet to actually make a strong connection with First Nation people, reach out, connect to researchers, new industries. I'm definitely more than happy to talk to anyone about edible insects. The whole world of edible insects is new and exciting. And I think it's a really great opportunity for people to actually have a real crack at it right now while it's super fresh and super new, and share your stories too. I think it's really encouraging when people are so open and willing to talk about edible insects, and there's a bit of a culture about people trying to keep on to hold on to their secrets and be really secretive about how they farm insects. But I think at the end of the day, people need to be more open about talking about edible insects and how we go about farming them so that we can all grow and collaborate together. So yeah, it's a great document, really good job by everyone involved. There's a huge list that you can see up now of all the people that were involved. All these people, me personally, I couldn't thank anyone enough who's all been involved in this. I love this document, it's the best thing I've ever read. And yeah, it's really positive to see, and thank you CSIRO. So it's awesome. Okay, that's everything that I believe is a really key kind of areas. If there was anything that anyone picked up in this document that they missed, feel free to send me a message and we can talk about it to discuss it further, because to be honest, this document is massive, and you could sit here and this video could be like 3 hours long about us talking about every single aspect in this document. But just in terms of kind of like where we are currently in Australia with edible insects, where we want to go in the future, what we want to do with them, all the different insects that we have access to in Australia, and then also involving our First Nation people in with this project, I think is really important. So, and like CSIRO said, we do have a great opportunity being in Australia, and let's have a real crack at actually making sure that we have a global impact with our farming practices and how we go about farming insects. So it's really cool. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in and has made it this far. If there are any questions about the document or any questions about what we do at Schubugs, leave it below or send me an email. I'm more than happy to talk about it. We've just cracked 620-ish followers on YouTube, so that's really exciting. Thank you all for the support, and we'll see you next time. Bye.